Welcome to our Kuja Pamoja platform, where we bring in innovators to share with us their contributions as part of the social innovation agenda. Kuja Pamoja is a space for debate, reflection, and ideation, a space where we discuss how to approach social problems from fresh angles and how to design innovative solutions. Kuja Pamoja has two wings: Kutenganisha, where we facilitate conversations to disintegrate various variables that hold a social problem in place, and Kutunga, where we integrate those elements to facilitate transition in the process of transforming the social problem. My name is Linda Kuvheya, and I'm a strategist at Riasako. In our Kutunga Conversation today, we will discuss how systems thinking can transform agriculture and food systems. We are joined here by Tafadzwanashe Mabhaudhi. He is the Research Associate Professor and Co-Director at the Center for Transformative Agricultural and Food Systems at the University of KwaZulu Natal here in South Africa. Welcome, Tafadzwa, and thanks again for joining us in this exciting conversation.
Thank you, Linda, for having me.
Okay, let me just start by giving context and background to this conversation. Okay, our food and agriculture system has been developed and created by solving individual problems without paying much attention to the interconnected nature and relationships that build up the systems as a whole. So when, for example, we started having problems of pests and weeds, we developed pesticides and herbicides to deal with those particular problems. But we know that those chemicals have also contributed to soil degradation, leading to reduced and poor quality yields. More chemicals are involved in the storage and keeping perishable foods fresh. And the length of time that food remains edible and nutritious depends on temperature, on moisture, and other various factors that actually affect the growth rate of organisms that cause spoilage. In view of the fact that 40% of all food requires refrigeration, and 15% of world fossil fuel energy is used in food transport refrigeration. Looking at now the more information that you have shared also, Tafadzwa, in your publication on the status of underutilized crops in South Africa, you argue that underutilized crops represent an important component of agrobiodiversity with potential to contribute to climate adaptation, food security, and sovereignty in rural areas. However, these underutilized crops, they continue to occupy the peripheries of mainstream agriculture. So many ideas that have been applied in the food and agriculture systems as solutions to various challenges were intended for the good, but they've also led to a sequence of unintended side effects that have built a food and agriculture system that isn't all that socially, environmentally, or economically sustainable. So we know what missed along the way was the interconnected nature of all these pieces and their links within the systems and beyond. And all of a sudden, pest resistance and superbugs have popped up. A health crisis from eating too much of one or two primary foods and losing diversity in our diet emerged. And a supply chain that results in massive amounts of carbon emissions grew largely. Maybe these were still the best solutions out there at that particular time. But had a systems approach been taken, work could have been simultaneously done to help counteract some of these consequences from the beginning. There is a lot of work being done now to help fix what has been broken. New organizations and companies are designing innovation around a systems-based approach. And we know that the Center for Transformative Agricultural and Food Systems is one of such organizations in South Africa. So let's just jump now into the questions that I have for Tafadzwa and then spark the conversation. Tafadzwa, back to you. Before we dive into our topic of the day, can you please start by telling us about yourself and maybe a little bit also about the Center for Transformative Agriculture and Food Systems, where you are co-director?
Okay, thank you, Linda. So I'm a crop scientist by training with a specialization in agricultural water management. So that combines the understanding of crop responses to environment, an understanding of hydrology, and an understanding of the agrometeorology.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I come from. And I've then transitioned into the space of climate change, and then the space of sustainable and resilient food systems. Then within that context, I've always had a passion for neglected and underutilized species. We call them NUs. They are known by many other names, orphan crops, underutilized crops, traditional crops, indigenous crops, and so forth. So we've worked on those for a long time to understand their agronomy, their water use, drought tolerance, nutritional value, and to try and fit them into water scarce and food insecure environments as alternative crops. So the Center for Transformative Agriculture and Food System houses all of this research, and it was formed to respond to the need, to drive a new transition towards sustainable and resilient food systems, more so with a view to translating the evidence base to informing policy and practice towards this goal. So that is the center that I now lead.
Awesome. Tafadzwa, you can now tell us a little bit more about systems thinking, the concept of systems thinking, specifically within the context of food and agricultural system. How do you interpret the concept?
So I think the concept of systems thinking is very well embedded within the concept of food systems.
Mm-hmm.
And what food systems represent. When previously we used to talk of food value chains, which are linear and commodity based. So you talk about the maize value chain, the bean value chain. But when we talk of food systems, we're essentially looking at the entire matrix of actors, role players, events, and multiple value chains all interacting in the same space and time, from field to fork. So everything that happens from the point of production to the point of consumption, and how it is interlinked in terms of how your food moves there, the land, the water, the environment, the health, and how all of those sort of link. So usually we talk of it in terms of like the agriculture, environment, health nexus. Mm-hmm. That's how we look at a sustainable food system. So it's a very systems-based approach in terms of then being able to understand the linkages that exist between the various actors and sectors, the trade-offs and the synergies that also exist within that system, and being able to understand your leverage points or nexus points, which give you the opportunity to bring about change into the system, and also just being able to, systems thinking is very useful in terms of helping you map it all out and understand the complexity of it all, as well as creating the space for the multiple perspectives. Earlier on, you spoke about, silos and how certain things are being dealt with separately. Now, a systems approach allows you to have that space that allows for multiple perspectives to be dealt with concurrently, and almost in a, we call it a polycentric manner, where nothing is more important than the other. They are all equally important. So that's how we bring it into this food system space.
Thank you very much. You came up, you mentioned a lot of new concepts here. You spoke about complexity, you spoke about the interconnectedness and linkages between various variables in the system, and you also spoke about leverage points. And I know that over a long time, science and practice have been developing many sustainable farming practices, or that to just deal with those challenges that we've been facing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more, Tafadzo, about some of the farming practices that you feel have been neglected in Africa in general, and how those practices can actually improve food systems if they're incorporated.
Okay, so agriculture in Africa traditionally was sustainable, and it was ecologically friendly. And if you grew up, even if you grew up in the cities and went to the rural areas, there was harmony in terms of how agriculture was done with nature. You hardly ever found a field that was monocropped. There was always a mixture. There would be maize, your sweet sorghum, you'd have your pumpkins, your watermelon, your cucumber, and so many things happening in the same field, and the family making use of it throughout the year. So not only was there diversity in the field, there was then diversity in the kitchen, because the sources of food were diverse, which meant the dietary the diet was diverse. And as we moved from that, obviously in response to growing populations, industrialization, and having more people living in cities. So let's say in Africa, when colonization came in, it created towns and cities, which attracted labor to work in mines and so forth. And that moved people away from where food was produced. Traditionally, people were located where food was produced. With this new setup, they went and lived in places where food was not produced. So there were now large populations that needed to be fed, and there needed to be an efficient system that could produce large quantities of food that could be transported and stored to feed these large populations in these growing cities. So that is how, that transition, moving away from that system, came into being. And of course, we had things like the Green Revolution happening to come in and increase the yields and productivity in those sort of systems. And along with that, we lost a significant amount of diversity that used to exist within farmers' fields as they moved more into monocropping and so forth. You also had a market system coming into place around the same time. So, traditionally, if you've seen the maize land races, they are very colorful. They are not white. But you find that when the market system came in, it paid a premium for white maize. So, and now everyone needed to earn money to be able to transact and live life. So if you wanted to sell your maize and get some income, logic dictated that you grow the white maize. And you more. And then over time, the white maize slowly replaced, those land races. But the land races were very, nutrient dense, very drought tolerant. They made good porridge for the kids and all of those other benefits that may not have been obvious during the industrial stage of advancing agriculture. So it's what systems thinking teaches us about, the concept of trade-offs and synergies. That whilst we made advances, in terms of increasing productivity, which was yield per unit area.
Yes.
The trade-offs were that we lost diversity. And some of that diversity, a lot of it actually underpinned the resilience of systems. So as systems became more efficient, they actually became more sensitive to perturbations, such that now when you've got drought or anything that happens, and you've got one crop standing in the field, if there is a hailstorm and it hits your maize, that's it.
Yes, that's
It's
the end.
opposed
Yes.
to, that's the end. In the old days, you'd have a very diverse system where one crop would fail, but several other crops, would be able to survive, and so forth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And provide food
not,
for the family. Yeah.
Yeah. So it might not have been from, an efficiency perspective, it might not have been the most efficient system speaking, but from a resilience perspective, it was resilient and stable over time. So it's those things that we lost, that we are now working hard to get back to again.
Yeah, you have said a lot right there, Tafadzwa, and as you were speaking, I was trying to get, a sense of, like you mentioned perspective, which is very important to say, let's look at the indigenous farming practices and from a different perspective of not just looking at them and saying that these farming practices cannot provide on a commercial scale, but what are the, how sustainable are these practices in terms of providing food and nutrition to the family? And you also spoke about, the different, the biodiversity, the different kind of crops that we actually being produced in one field at one time, and where there is watermelons in the field of maize, where while we're waiting for maize while we're waiting for us to harvest the maize, we can eat the watermelons in the meantime. So that kind of sustainability in terms of food provision for the family is actually, quite a interesting perspective. But maybe let's just go back into the kind of work that you're doing now at the Center for Transformative Agriculture and Food Systems in terms of conducting research. I understand that most of your research is to inform policy and decision making. So can you please share a little bit about some of these policies that the center has influenced and what action that have resulted in? And maybe you can also add some of the things that you have already touched in regarding indigenous farming practices.
Okay, so the center, we work across the science policy practice interface. So when it comes to indigenous crops, we did a lot of research from around 2008 coming into around 2015 or so, which was basically on the applied side, understanding the agronomy of these crops, identifying the range of crops that is drought tolerant, nutrient dense, that fits within rural landscapes, and trying to develop production guidelines for how to produce them in a way that optimizes their productivity so that you get the most out of them. But what we realized was, despite the overwhelming amount of evidence, which everyone talks about every now and again, some even call them superfoods and so forth, there was not much uptake in terms of their actual utilization on the other end. So there wasn't a translation of the evidence into the practice, which is where people then start producing a lot of these crops. And one of the reasons why is because of policy. We have got a situation now where out of a possible 30,000 edible crops, we depend on like 3 for 90% of our calories. It was not accidental. We got to this point because of decisions and policies that obviously created an advantage for certain crops at the expense of others.
Yes.
So you find, for example, we're in South Africa, if there is a program to support farmers with inputs, normally, it would distribute maize seed, it would distribute dry bean seeds.
That's true. Yeah.
Same if you go across the entire Southern Africa region. In Zimbabwe, they're doing their command agriculture and so forth. You find the focus is on distributing, maize seed, soybeans, wheat, and so forth, the so-called strategic food security crops. So then it means the breeding and research and the whole mechanism supports those few crops at the expense of the rest. So there's a need then to work towards informing policy so that policy starts opening up to the possibility of supporting a broader basket of crops. But policy is informed from an evidence perspective. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is being firstly to develop the evidence.
Yeah.
And once there was sufficient evidence to support the case that these crops, they actually have the potential, they can do this and they can do it there, and this is how you can do it with them. We started writing policy briefs. So we've written several policy briefs addressing the issue of food diversification using underutilized crops, sustainable diets through underutilized crops. We have done research where we have identified what we called the 15 priority underutilized crops. So we said, if we were to target a core group of these underutilized crops, yes, a core group of 15 that have the most potential and likelihood for success. So we did that. That was research funded by the Water Research Commission of South Africa. They adopted those recommendations. And since 2017, they've used those recommendations and the roadmap that we developed as a strategy to fund research and development on underutilized crops. So it has created a new era of focused research, because before there was just a lot of research happening. But we said, look, we now need the research to be focused for impact. So we've done that. We've recently completed a study now where we were mapping these crops, because again, whilst we say they have potential to be produced in marginal areas, there were no suitability maps that actually show that these are the areas that they are suitable, and confirming whether the areas that they are suitable for production actually overlap with the areas that are marginal. And also comparing them, benchmarking them with the major crops to say, if we were to produce sorghum in these areas versus maize, this is the comparison.
Yes.
This is where sorghum would do better than maize. So it makes sense to promote sorghum. If we look at it from a climate change perspective, this is the picture for maize over the future until 2100. How the yields are going to improve, how the areas suitable are going to shift. And this is the picture for these underutilized crops. And we're encouraged that, that has shown, rather confirmed what we've been saying, that they are suitable for climate change, because the research that we've just completed has shown that the areas that are suitable for their production are going to increase, and their yields are also going to increase under climate change. And we are now packaging that into a policy brief that we want to inform the climate smart agriculture strategy in South Africa, to say, here is a basket of crops that can form part of the climate smart agriculture interventions that will happen. We are also looking more in terms of the commercialization. So we've got work now that is funded by the Technology Innovation Agency, where we are aiming to register varieties for some of these crops, like a Bambara groundnut.
Yes.
Because the other challenge was also there are no seeds available. So even if you like them, you can't walk into a shop and buy seeds of them. So the other part is we have to get seeds, out there so that we can actually boost the production. So we've got now to a stage where we are having varieties registered. We are partnering with commercial companies that will distribute these varieties to make sure that they reach people. We are working with farmers to get them organized so that they can be part of the value chains for these crops when they do come in at various stages and so forth. So it's a long road.
Yeah, and
to informing the practice and the policies.
That's very impressive, Tafadzo. That's a very, a lot of work that you're doing, and I can see that there's a lot of tangible results in your work. And I really like the fact that you also you highlighted the climate change perspective. And I would like to ask you, related to climate change, the impacts that climate change has had on agriculture, the threats that it has had on most vulnerable communities, especially in Africa, where we have considerable young populations. And there are lots of ongoing discussions. Even right now, as we speak, the COP26 is in motion in Glasgow on climate change and the circular economy. And we know that various efforts have been made to engage young people on the topic of climate change. The level of youth participation in climate action and agriculture is really low. You have mentioned already, even in your introduction, that you're doing some work around climate adaptation. So what specific opportunities, Tafadzo, do you see emerging for youth in the agriculture and climate adaptation space, and especially in this digital age, just looking at what role technology can play in all of this?
Look, one thing that is clear is that the current systems and the structures that have perpetuated those systems are no longer relevant to the current discourse and to the future discourse. So that is clear, and I think everyone agrees with that.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees with the need that we need to transform the systems, and there needs to be a transition. So everyone is in agreement that there needs to be a radical or a paradigm shift. Where people might not agree is the pace at which change must happen, who should fund certain aspects of that change. Should everyone change, or is it just some places that should change? And that's part of also understanding systems.
Yes.
And how systems progress in the contextual nature of systems. So, but what I'm saying is that we are in an age of change, change that is happening and change that is set to happen. And that creates opportunities for young people to come into the space. A lot of the answers that we need, to be honest with you, we don't have them currently. They always say that there's that saying that says, you can't expect the same people who've created a problem to come up with solutions. So a lot of us are part of the generation that has created the problem.
Yes, you're right.
And young people are a different generation now that's going to solve these problems. So there's huge space for them to come in and innovate, and provide new solutions. There's been Uber for transport.
Yes.
That's something that, if you had asked anyone, a few years ago, an expert in transport, they would have not thought of Uber. They would have told you many different models of improving transport, public transport, but not an Uber type model. So you've got those disruptive technologies. And what I tell young people, we've got a whole thematic area on youth in agriculture, is that come into the space, understand the space, and innovate within the space. When you look at agriculture from a food systems perspective, it's actually broad, because it's not just about the production in the field. there are many supporting industries, that speak to agriculture. My core work on a day-to-day basis doesn't actually involve, being in the field and doing anything backbreaking. It's modeling. It happens on a desktop. That's where I develop advisories and do scenarios and come up with strategies and so forth. We've got things like drone applications in agriculture that are becoming very useful and very topical to informing precision agriculture decisions at scale. You've got, the big data movement, where mobile applications are being developed. You've got people innovating in the space of redesigning how market access is. You've got that application that was designed in Kenya that allows farmers in rural areas, to get market intelligence about where there is demand and what the prices are being offered and so forth. That's innovation. So you've got like a commodity market that is now happening at a very localized level. You've got people who are moving in to become aggregators in those spaces. So there's a whole lot of innovation that is there, and opportunities to start new businesses where you actually don't have to compete, with a major company that is already there. And those are the opportunities that I would encourage young people to come in and occupy, the non-traditional spaces where there's room to innovate. The barriers to entry are few. The capital requirements are low because the currency there is innovation, startups and so forth. That's what I would encourage young people to do. So with climate change, there's a whole lot of challenges that it is bringing. But at the same time, there's a whole lot of
opportunities in the same space
that comes alongside, with those challenges. So it's also about a matter of perspective that we need to change. That are we going to continuously look at it as a problem, where also we are the victims of climate change? Then we sit back and we feel hard done and negatively affected. Or are we going to turn around the scenario and say, but this is, it's an opportunity, and it's creating new spaces that we can step into, non-traditional spaces that are open. Some are not regulated yet. There are no barriers to you walking in and occupying it. So there's that need for a change in perspective, especially when it comes to the youth, how they perceive agriculture and how they understand it as a business, not as an activity at the primary point of it. So it's changing perspectives and getting young people excited about agriculture and tapping into their energies and innovation and bringing it into that space to drive the change that is needed. So it's a big social movement thing. I think that's part of the work you guys are trying to do
at
get
Riasa,
conversations started, get people involved and so forth. So what you are doing is actually part of the solution, I can say.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Tafadzwa, for that positivity and encouraging young people to get into the space and get excited and understand that agriculture is also, an economic activity that can actually improve their own life. It's not just about thinking that they're commercial farmers who do this and I can't compete, but there are so many opportunities because there's various problems, and at various levels, like you rightly mentioned, it's not just about farming, it's about the whole process of getting food from the farm to the folk. So thank you very much again, Tafadzwa, for joining us and taking part in this conversation. And thank you again to our viewers for following this conversation. Today, we discussed with Tafadzwa how systems thinking can transform agriculture and food systems. There's going to be much more of this kind of conversations through our Kuja Pamoja platform here at Riasako. Stay connected, and please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you again for joining us today. See you next time.